For more than 2 decades, MSF has maintained a medical program in Somalia, but now it's simply too dangerous for its staff to operate safely in the East African country. And here now to tell us more and to share his recent experiences from being on the ground in Syria, MSF Canada Executive Director Steve Cornish. Good to have you in that chair.
Thanks.
Never had you here before.
No, long overdue.
I agree, so we're glad to have you here. Now, just tell us about, before we talk about Somalia, obviously Syria is hugely in the news, and your organization is there, and you were there. When were you there?
I'm just back last Saturday. I was 3 weeks in the region, including in Iraq, inside Syria, and in Lebanon and Jordan.
Give us a sense of what you saw.
Well, on the Iraqi border, I saw thousands of people crossing a no man's land, trying to reach their refugee status, many of them carrying just a small plastic bag or dragging one suitcase behind them as their whole family. But they were exasperated. Many had been displaced several times inside Syria, and now they were just at wit's end. They just couldn't see how to continue, and so at least they were making it to some place where they'd be safe. Inside the country, the medical system has all but collapsed. It's extremely difficult for people to get medical care, even to meet the basics of everyday life. And there are tens of thousands of people in transit camps who are blocked along the borders, who can't get refugee status, they can't get across the border, they can't go home because the fighting is too intense. And speaking with them, they had two huge fears. One was the ongoing fighting. Every once in a while, the planes fly over the refugee camps and they just open up fire.
Syrian army planes? Just
open up fire, not to do a lot of damage, just to remind you that they're there. They do the same over some of our clinics. One of our clinics, I saw the bullet holes on the outside extremitor wall where they'd done the same. But they feared the conflict violence, and they also feared the winter in equal measure, because they had been already through one winter in very difficult conditions. They have tents that aren't insulated. The assistance levels fluctuate. They're down to 2 meals a day. They're living in very difficult conditions, and they just don't understand how it is that the international community hasn't responded more to their suffering and to their needs.
Well, that's interesting. You look at the events of the last couple of weeks, and you've seen how the debate has percolated through the American houses of government and so on. And if you were over there, what would you tell people about why the world is sitting back and
well, I don't
doing
have,
what it's doing?
I don't have an answer to them on the why not, and that's a very difficult question when they say, don't people know? And when you have to tell them that, yes, they do know, but at least I can tell them I'm going to come back, and I am going to talk on shows like this, and I am going to talk to government. But what we've seen with this diplomatic fury in the last few weeks is at least you can see that results can be had, discussions can be had. And what's amazing to us is how tens of thousands of people have died in aerial bombardments that have not distinguished between civilian and military targets, that have been indiscriminate, which are also illegal in conflict. We've seen how the health system has collapsed, and we haven't seen any answer to that. There's so little aid getting through into Syria, and so we need the same type of diplomatic fury, if you like, around humanitarian issues, around protection issues.
My hunch is, though, that the world assumes that when you're in the midst of a civil war where 100,000 people are dead, 2 million people put into flight, that it's kind of impossible to make any progress on the kinds of issues you're talking about. Is that accurate?
I don't think so. We're proof that you can operate inside Syria. We have 6 surgical hospitals and maternity wards operating inside Syria, and 4 health clinics with international teams. I'm not saying that it's easy. It is a challenge, but it can be done. And in areas where we can't secure full permissions, we're supporting another 26 hospitals and 46 health centers. So aid can get in. It's about having the desire to do so. The surrounding countries haven't declared emergencies, despite the huge burden they're facing with the refugees on their population. And so aid agencies can't get in to work. They're not getting visas, they're not getting approved. Other agencies could come, but they don't have that access.
When you say permission, do you need permission from the Assad government to be in there?
Well, we've sought permission from the government to work out of Damascus, but we've not been able to get that permission. So we've just gone ahead and worked cross-border. And we've encouraged other organizations to do the same.
So you have no legal standing or papers or that kind of thing to be there?
No, we just go where the needs are, and that's where you'll find us.
Do you have any kind of relationship with, now admittedly there's not much of the country that's held by the rebel side at this point, but do you have any relationship with them or contact with them that allows you to work in areas where they're relatively in control?
Yeah, we always work in 2 ways. When we're working directly present, we work through community acceptance. So we talk to all the rebel leaders, we talk to government leaders, we talk to community elders, and we basically tell them we'll bring our assistance if you at least don't attack us, if you tell us what insecurity might lie, and if you basically help be part of our security guarantee package. That doesn't mean that they protect us directly. It just means that they know what we're doing and that they'll try to at least allow that to the best of their abilities.
Do they want you there?
Generally in conflict, they do. It's not always the case, but even the most hardened rebels I've seen in Afghanistan, I've seen in other countries, the most hardened rebels can generally understand that children need vaccinations, that their wives need a safe place to give birth. And so there is an underlying humanity that can be built, and a humanitarian space that can be built on conflict. Our whole organization is built around part of that premise.
It is amazing that in the midst of all of this carnage, babies are still being born. That still has to happen, right?
And life has to go on. And one of the difficult things is that there are very few hospitals accepting women. One of the things that's happened here, hospitals have been attacked in this conflict by both sides. But from the government side, when you have an air force, of course, the damage you can do is much greater than the attacks that the armed opposition can bring about. But there are very few hospitals left that have maternity wards or that will take care of secondary conditions, chronic conditions. So there are many silent victims to this war that don't get added up in the numbers that we see.
You had one of your doctors killed in Syria recently.
We did indeed. A very tragic event, especially he was a surgeon. And a surgeon in a war zone is something that's akin to a very high priest in a temple.
How was he killed?
He was assassinated, basically. And
was it targeted assassination?
He was assassinated, and we're conducting an investigation at this stage as to the circumstances around that. We've also redoubled our efforts with all of the armed groups in the area in order to maintain this community acceptance that I was speaking about earlier. Clearly, it's not always 100%, and in sometimes we do face very difficult conditions. What we did in order to clearly show a signal is we withdrew our expatriate teams from that site for at least the period of a week while we conduct our investigation and while we renegotiate our access conditions with all those in the area.
You're not the police, though. You're not the FBI. You're not. I mean, you guys don't carry guns, right? You have nothing. You have no force other than your moral suasion to conduct an investigation. So how do you find out who did this?
Well, it's more important to ensure that the guarantees going forward will be strengthened than it is to try to go after some cause of justice, if you like. The ongoing issues in that area are people disappear every day. People are assassinated every day. And people are indiscriminately killed every day, far more than what has befallen us and far more than what has befallen in these latest neurotoxic agent attacks.
Has that murder made you consider whether you think you should be leaving Syria as an organization?
No, I don't think it would be fair to say that. What it would be fair to say is that every incident we take very seriously, and we review all of our security practices, all of our guarantees in order to ensure that our teams, our hospital facilities can be protected going forward.
Where was he from?
He was a surgeon from Syria.
He was from Syria,
yep.
But just aligned with your organization.
He was working with us, bringing his very valuable life-saving skills to many, many people injured in the conflict. So it's a real tragedy.
You did leave Somalia. You've just recently made the decision that you have to leave Somalia. How come?
Well, in Somalia, what we came to the understanding was that some of these groups that we rely on for security, in the same way I just discussed a little earlier, were either no longer able to maintain the security guarantees, or in some cases were even complicit in attacks against our organization. We've had 16 fatalities and 7 different kidnappings, not 7 different kidnappings, but 7 staff members kidnapped over the last number of years. And while it's not the overwhelming amount of those attacks, it really is the fact that some of those who we relied on for protection were actually complicit in some of them. And this is really the straw that broke the camel's back.
And can you give us some idea about who these groups that you were relying on to protect your people, who they were?
Sure, they're the full gamut of actors in Somalia. So from actors in the transitional government, from clanic elders to leaders in different armed opposition groups.
And why do you think they went back on their commitments to you?
It's a question that we're still struggling with a little bit. Sometimes you do see, after a long term of conflict, the social fabric phrase, other types of pressures become such that it's very hard for them to exert their political influence, perhaps, in order to avoid such things or to remediate them when they do occur. But the coming to consciousness on this has been very painful. We are probably one of the largest healthcare providers in Somalia. That country, many people have known nothing but famine and civil war for the last several decades. And our organization last year alone carried out over 600,000 consultations. So this is a hugely difficult decision for us to make. I was part of making this decision, and I can't recall a more difficult set of discussions to have been involved with when you look at the humanitarian outcomes of such a decision.
The spokesman for the Somali presidency, I know you know this, but I'm going to share this quote with our viewers, said the following back in August: MSF's decision is exactly what Al-Shabaab and Al-Qaeda want, so that they can terrorize people further. We ask MSF to review its decision and cooperate with the people. Now, I get what review the decision means, but what do you think they mean when they say we want you to cooperate with the people?
I find that a very difficult statement to make heads or tails of, given that we have been there serving nothing but the people for the last 22 years. And what we would underline is that it is precisely members of his government, members of clanic elders, members of the armed opposition groups that he cites. It's these people who bear the responsibility for the lack of health care that will be the result of our leaving. And it's with these people that we need to see a real difference. They have to underline the value to health care of their population. They have to also ensure that medical facilities, ambulances, healthcare workers aren't targeted. This is not only about international workers. A number of local medical personnel, a number of medical structures have been attacked or looted. Ambulances have been blocked and shot at. This is sort of a widespread problem that's going to need a real tectonic shift in the way that the authorities in Somalia look at healthcare and their population's access to it.
I don't mean this to sound like a naive question, but you know, of course, when, for example, American personnel or business people or whatever go into the region, they hire security companies to make sure that their people are safe. Do you have the resources to do that? Is that an option for you guys?
It's not a resource question, and in fact, in Somalia, we had resorted to armed guards to protect our medical personnel. It's the only country in the world where we do so, and that's already, for us, it already erodes some of our own principles of independence and neutrality. One of the other issues that we faced was an inability to get to certain areas where we knew the needs were highest, an inability to oversee some of our programs when we wanted to. And we have to be able to assist those who are most in need impartially, according only to need, not depending on which group they belong. But we also have to be independent. We have to be able to make our own choices and to go where it is that we feel is the most important areas to set up medical work. And we'd already compromised on those principles in Somalia. So we didn't leave easily. We tried a lot of things before arriving at this decision.
Stephen, in our last minute here, I want to just finally get a better sense of what it's like to operate in an environment where you're not talking about a country run by a government that happens to be poor and you're in there to help. You are talking about, you know, war zones where there are multiple factions all shooting at each other all the time. How do you get done what you need to get done in that kind of environment?
Well, one of the things is it's not all shooting all the time. Life goes on in a war zone, and we often have trouble seeing that. People still have to get to market. They still have to feed their kids. Those who can still try to get to work. And so there is a whole environment where one can work. And one of the basic building blocks of life in those environments is access to healthcare and access to life-saving healthcare for those who have been caught up directly in the violence. And so our job is to get into those areas. We need the empathy of Canadians and of the Canadian government and its discussions with other governments to ensure that aid is going to get through into Syria, that the conditions that are blocking other reactors from getting in can be removed, and that our own humanity will shine to the fore here, because the bell is tolling for us. And when you have 4 million displaced internally, 2 million refugees, 30% of the population that are wondering, has the international community forgot about them and their needs? And our answer to that is no. And I don't believe Canadians' answer to that is no either. I think we need the same empathy that we hold when there's an earthquake that shatters down. That's how the war is when it comes to town. It's like an earthquake hits your house, the roof falls down, the walls explode, and all of a sudden, going about that everyday life that you were struggling with disappears, and now you need life-saving medical care, or you have to flee with nothing but the clothes on your back. And it's in that most desperate hour of need that I think anybody would be happy to see a helping hand. I certainly would be happy to see one if it came to my house, and that's our job.
Stephen, thanks for coming in and giving us this update. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Stephen Cornish, Executive Director, MSF Canada.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.